Good evening, everyone. Surely by now, um, a lot of y'all may have heard about the unfortunate case out of Frisco, Texas, where a black teenager deleted a Caucasian teenager. Um, the police report is out. Um, Shout out to Law of Self Defense for this. Um, since I have it, we're gonna get into it, okay? This is just me getting into the police report. That's it and that's all. Let's go.
Let's Monopoly go! Chris! Kiki! Welcome, everybody, to another episode of The Law of Self-Defense. Here to talk about the tragic stabbing in Frisco, Texas that occurred at a track meet just about a week ago today. And we have some new information because the police report over the stabbing has been released. I did cover the stabbing initially on Saturday. It occurred last Wednesday. But of course, on Saturday we had rather limited information, kind of the chaos of war happening. Now we have an actual police report to take a look at, and that's what we'll be doing today, doing a use of force legal analysis of this event based on those additional facts, and of course, Texas law on this case. So, as I said last Wednesday, 17-year-old Carmelo Anthony, 17-year-old young black man, fatally stabbed Austin Metcalf, also 17 years old, happened to be white. Both of them were attending a Texas high school track meet. Both the 17-year-olds were in high school, but in different high schools. Carmelo Anthony, the stabber, quickly fled the scene, discarded the knife he'd used in nearby bleachers. He was shortly captured and arrested, conceded to the stabbing immediately upon contact with police, and suggested he had killed Metcalf in self-defense. Actually kind of asked the question, pondered whether it might have been self-defense. So we have some new information now, and we can explore a little bit more of Texas law, and that's our purpose for all of us today. So, as I am prone to do, I did do a couple of quick polls on this. One on Twitter. I asked, what likely verdict do you think the police report will support? Now, Carmelo Anthony has been charged with murder, obviously an unlawful killing. He's going to be claiming self-defense, a justification for that killing, which would make it not a crime. So we're looking at either murder or a justified homicide, or potentially somewhere in the middle. What might be a voluntary manslaughter? So we'll talk about all of that in the context of Texas law applied to the facts of this case. So here's the first poll on Twitter. What verdict do you think the police report will likely support? Justified self-defense, 4%. 4% of you. Mitigated manslaughter, which is voluntary manslaughter is a mitigated form of murder. And simply cold-blooded murder, that is 77% of you. And on YouTube, the results were pretty similar. 2% think the police report will support self-defense, 15% mitigated manslaughter, and 83% cold-blooded murder. Now, I have not read the police report yet. What I've seen of the facts so far, independent of the police report, is making murder look pretty good. In fact, before we look at the police report, why don't we actually take a look at the criminal statutes, so that we're looking at the facts with an understanding of what the law requires. So for the crime of murder, under Texas law, I'll pull that up in just a moment. Now, I do want to remind all of you, to please please, if you like this content, subscribe. It's free, and we're darn close. Well, we just broke 180,000 on this morning's show. Now we're at 180,280. Our goal is 1 million subscribers. We can only do that with your gracious support. So if you could hit that subscribe button, I would really appreciate it. And click that thumbs up like button too. That's what convinces the YouTube algorithm to share our content more broadly. Okay, let's take a look at some Texas statutes. I've got them prepped here. What do we got first? Murder. Texas Penal Code 9.02. It's kind of a jumbled statute. So we're going to skip this part 8 to get to the actual crime here. What does it take to have committed murder under Texas law? Well, you commit the offense of murder if you intentionally cause the death of an individual. That's one way to commit murder. Did Carmela Anthony intentionally cause the death of Austin Metcalf? Well, he stabbed him in the chest, stabbed him in the heart with a knife. You're presumed to intend the natural consequences of your conduct. You stab someone in the heart with a knife, you know you're likely to kill him, so you're intending the natural consequences of their death. That's murder. Now, importantly, it's murder unless it can be justified as self-defense. Self-defense is a legal defense to this conduct. If you did this, if you intentionally stabbed someone in the heart with a knife, but you can meet the conditions of the self-defense justification, then this is not a crime. It's not always lawful to kill people. Sorry, it's not always unlawful to kill people. If they're killed in lawful self-defense, the killing of another person is simply not a crime. Or alternatively, you commit murder if you intend to cause serious bodily injury and commit an act clearly dangerous to human life that causes the death of an individual. I think we're well beyond that with the stab to the heart here. Then they have felony murder. That's not relevant here. And then they have if you kill someone with illicit drugs, controlled substances, like you give them an overdose or something. That would all qualify as murder. Murder is a felony offense of the first degree under Texas law. I'm not super familiar with Texas sentencing. I looked it up. A felony of the first degree in Texas law is good for 5 to 99 years or life. Now, obviously, I would not expect a intentional murder to get a sentence of 5 years. There must be more to the sentencing structure than that. But Carmelo Anthony is looking prospectively at 99 years or life in prison. What about manslaughter? Well, Texas does have a separate manslaughter statute. This is kind of an interesting facet of Texas law, actually. Let me pull it up. Most states that have a manslaughter statute will define both voluntary manslaughter and involuntary manslaughter in the manslaughter statute. Texas doesn't do it that way. It has both crimes, but the manslaughter statute in the Penal Code only refers to involuntary manslaughter, which is reckless manslaughter. We see that here. A person commits an offense, manslaughter, if they recklessly, not intentionally, but recklessly cause the death of an individual. Recklessness is when you knowingly create a risk of death to someone else, like drunk driving. You ignore that risk and someone dies as a result of your conduct.
Okay.
Also, if you're mishandling a firearm, like Alec Baldwin was, that would be a reckless manslaughter. Instead of defining the other form of manslaughter, voluntary manslaughter. So in reckless manslaughter, you're not intending to harm anybody, right? The person driving home drunk from the bar isn't intending to harm anybody. He's just trying to get home. But he's engaged in reckless conduct, and if he kills someone, it's reckless involuntary manslaughter. His use of force against that person was involuntary. The other kind of manslaughter is voluntary manslaughter, where you're intending to use force against that other person. What makes that, and then they die as a result. Texas doesn't put voluntary manslaughter in the manslaughter statute. I'm not sure why. Instead, in a rather complicated way, it actually buries it in the murder statute for Texas. So let's go back and take a look at the murder statute. Now, the concept is the same, it's just a weird way of them structuring the law like this.
Have you ever seen the magic glasses that can see clearly without glasses? These glasses can not only see far away, but also see near. These smart zoom glasses from Japan are really great. No need to wear lenses. The degree can be used from 100 degrees to 700 degrees. The glasses will automatically adapt to
Way of them structuring the law like this. So, we already talked about murder. Here's the murder statute again. But if we go all the way to the bottom here, we have this paragraph D. Now, voluntary manslaughter typically occurs when you want to cause harm to someone. Maybe you even want to kill them, but you're acting under what's called adequate provocation. You're acting in hot blood. You came home and found your wife in bed with another dude, or things escalated from a traditional fist fight to something more life-threatening than that, something that made it a hot-blooded killing instead of a cold-blooded, premeditated killing. The way, and it's the hot-blooded killing that mitigates what would have been murder down to manslaughter. The idea is that your heightened emotional state made it impossible for your mind to form the specific premeditation required for the crime of murder, so they mitigate it down to manslaughter. The way Texas does that is as so, in this paragraph D, at the punishment stage of the trial. So what this means is you've been charged with murder. You go to trial on murder. You get tried on the charge of murder. The jury convicts you of murder. Now you're at the punishment. The guilt stage of the trial is over. You've been found guilty of murder. Now the judge has to sentence you. This is the punishment stage of the trial, post-conviction. At that punishment stage, the defendant, now the convicted, can raise the issue as to whether he caused the death under an immediate influence of sudden passion arising from inadequate cause. So something that would have made anybody hot-blooded. If the defendant proves this is what happened by a preponderance of the evidence, instead of the killing being a felony of the first degree and potentially life in prison, it's mitigated down to a felony of the second degree, which carries a sentence of 2 to 20 years, instead of possibly life in prison. So this is what most states would call voluntary manslaughter, a mitigated form of cold-blooded murder. Now, what is it? Then you have to go all the way back up to the statute to find out what they meant when they said adequate cause and sudden passion. It's a very weird way to structure a statute. Adequate cause necessary for a finding, a mitigation to manslaughter, would mean cause that would commonly produce a degree of anger, rage, resentment, or terror in a person of ordinary temper, so not someone with poor emotional control, sufficient to render the mind incapable of cool reflection. So you're walking outside, taking your wife to dinner downtown, and somebody walks up and spits in your wife's face. Might that be adequate cause to produce a degree of anger, rage, resentment in a person of ordinary temper? It seems likely. And what does sudden passion means? Because the adequate cause has to have resulted in sudden passion, that hot-blooded state. Means passion directly caused, rising out of provocation by the individual killed, or another acting with them, which passion arises at the time of the offense and is not solely the result of some form of provocation. So it can't be some pre-existing animus, for example. That's what would be required to mitigate this killing from murder to manslaughter. And then, of course, we have self-defense, the legal justification. Now, people are making a big deal out of the fact that Carmelo Anthony, when he was arrested by police, immediately told them, yeah, I stabbed him. That doesn't make the stabbing a crime. And it's not inconsistent with lawful self-defense. Self-defense, the legal defense of self-defense, is inherently a defense of confession and avoidance. You have to concede that it was you who committed the use of force in order to claim self-defense. You can't say it wasn't me, I wasn't there, I have an alibi, and also I did it in self-defense. When you're claiming self-defense, you're not saying it wasn't me. You're saying it was me, I did it, but I meet the conditions for that to be justified as self-defense, and those conditions, of course, are spelled out in the Texas Penal Code for self-defense. In this context, deadly force self-defense, because obviously deadly force was used. A knife to the chest is always going to be deadly force. Folks, I see comments and stuff in the chat, but if you're on YouTube and you have a comment or question you want me to address directly, it needs to be a $5 super chat minimum. That's just the way we do it around here. That's just the way we do it. If you're a Law of Self-Defense member, of course, just put your comment or question in the chat, in the members only chat, and I'll address it there. So, what's required for a use of deadly force, the stabbing of Austin Metcalf by Carmelo Anthony? What's required for that to not be murder, not be manslaughter, but to be lawful self-defense? Well, it could be, sorry about that, I'll make it a little bigger again. It could be a justified killing, not a crime. If Carmelo Anthony, first of all, would be justified in using non-deadly force. Beyond that, if Carmelo Anthony reasonably believed his use of deadly force was immediately necessary to protect him against Austin Metcalf's use or attempted use of unlawful deadly force. So, if Austin Metcalf was conducting himself in such a way that a reasonable and prudent person would have believed he was about to use deadly force upon Carmelo Anthony, then Carmelo Anthony would be legally privileged, justified in using deadly defensive force. Another way to put this is that Carmelo Anthony stabbing to death of Austin Metcalf would be a justified homicide and not a crime, not murder or not manslaughter, if Carmelo Anthony committed the stabbing in the reasonable perception that Austin Metcalf was about to bring unlawful, imminent, deadly force against Carmelo Anthony. And the question then for us becomes, well, is there evidence to support that justification narrative? Is there evidence from which a reasonable person could have perceived that Austin Metcalf was presenting himself as an imminent, unlawful threat of deadly force harm to Carmelo Anthony, that required Carmelo Anthony to stab him in the chest, stab Austin Metcalf in the chest, and kill him? That's where we're at. Those are the questions for us. Now let's take a look at the facts that we have in the police report to see if the police report provides us with facts that would support a reasonable perception of Austin Metcalf presenting as an imminent deadly force, unlawful threat to Carmelo Anthony. And here we go. All right. Frisco Police Department arrest report. Anthony, oh, it's Carmelo Sincere. His middle name is Sincere. That's nice. Carmelo Sincere Anthony, age 17, born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, employed as a cashier at H-E-B, started April 2nd. He started that day. The day he stabbed Austin Metcalf is the day he started his job as a cashier at H-E-B. I'm pretty sure he's not employed there anymore. Charged with Penal Code 19.02C. Let's see. 19.02C. Yeah, that's just murder, first degree murder. So, narratives. Initial narrative: Officer Eduardo Cortez. At April 2nd, 2025, at 10 o'clock in the morning, Staley School Resource Officer Cortez, that's this guy, heard over the radio dispatch call out a stabbing at the stadium. Frisco PD indicates an athlete was stabbed. The suspect was reported being a black male wearing a gray hoodie and blue sweatpants. I left my office, ran across the parking lot to the stadium. As I entered, 2 high school age students informed me the victim was on the north end by the bleachers. I proceeded to the north end of the stadium on foot, got closer, saw the Memorial High School tent with multiple individuals. Arrived, an adult male who was on the track pointed out the suspect. The individual that was pointed out to me was a black male wearing a gray hooded sweater and dark colored Nike pants. The suspect at this point was on the track on the north end. There was a chain link fence that separated me from the suspect. I gave the suspect instructions to keep his hands up in the air. The suspect said verbally out loud, "I was protecting myself." So there's the claim of self-defense right there. That alone is probably enough for Carmelo Anthony to meet his burden of production and be privileged to argue self-defense at trial. It doesn't take much. It takes more than zero evidence, and that's probably enough right there. His self-serving statement upon first contact with police. It should be noted, the officer says, that I had not questioned him about the incident when he made that comment. The reason the officer is saying this is because before he's allowed to question a suspect as a suspect, he has to read him his Miranda rights. If he doesn't do that, whatever results from the questioning would be excluded from evidence, would not be admissible as evidence. Obviously, they want to admit this statement into evidence. They want to make sure there's not going to be a Miranda issue. He made this statement before I sought to question him, so therefore before I was required to Mirandize him, so the fact that he wasn't Mirandized is irrelevant. This statement, "I was protecting myself, I'm the guy who stabbed him, but I did it in lawful self-defense," will be admissible in evidence. I asked him if he had any weapons. He said no. I patted him down for weapons while we were walking along the fence, did not locate any. I instructed the male to continue walking along the fence, which he complied, towards an area where there was an opening. The suspect said he put his hands on me. I then detained the suspect in handcuffs behind the back, had him sit on the ground. Officer A. Ricky had arrived on the scene. I conducted another pat down, searched his person after he gave me consent, no weapons located. While he sat on the ground, I advised that I had the alleged suspect. The suspect then responds and says, "I'm not alleged, I did it." Still would be admissible. And of course, as I noted, required for self-defense. You're not saying it wasn't me, you're saying it was me, but I did it in self-defense. Next, Officer Ricky and I walked the suspect to the patrol vehicle, the other officer's vehicle. As we were walking to the squad car, the suspect was emotional. He said, "He put his hands on me. I told him not to." I did not question the suspect, again, avoiding Miranda issues here. I did not question the suspect about the incident while he was escorted to the patrol vehicle. I searched his person once again, had him sit in the back seat. When the suspect was in the back seat, I noticed fresh blood on his left middle finger. I verbally acknowledged that I saw the blood out loud so that it would be captured on my body-worn camera. It should be noted that the suspect asked me, "Is he going to be okay?" while he was in the back seat. Again, this is just evidence consistent with him having been the person who delivered the stab wound. Officer continues, I then identified the suspect. He provided his name and date of birth verbally as Carmelo Anthony, black male with the date of birth, whatever. I ran that through Frisco PD dispatch. Officer Hancock arrived on scene, remained with me and the suspect, checked via eSchool, a database for Frisco Independent School District students to confirm his identity. It matched the individual I had in custody. Sergeant Holland transported the suspect to the Frisco PD. Hancock and I transported him to the FPD jail. I was advised by the sergeant to transport him to Frisco PD jail. Again, I did not question Carmelo about the incident. Upon arriving at the jail, Carmelo was escorted to the intake area. Jail staff changed him into jail attire. I remained with the jail staff the entire time that he changed. The clothes that he had been wearing was placed in an evidence bag. The clothes remained in my possession from this point. So they're establishing the chain of custody of the evidence, so that can't be disputed later. that they were not left unattended and tampered with by somebody, for example. Upon Carmelo being placed in a jail cell, I continued to keep possession of his clothes. I returned to my patrol car, placed the clothes in the back trunk area, drove out of the Sally Port, parked in the parking area. Clothes remained in my trunk until crime scene technician took possession of the clothes. I added my body-worn camera to the case. No further information to report. That was his only involvement. The other officer involved, Allison Rickey, 10 a.m., wearing full Frisco police uniform, operating a cruiser, dispatched to the report of a stabbing at the stadium. Police dispatch advised an athlete had been stabbed. The suspect was a black male wearing a gray hooded sweatshirt and blue sweatpants.
Want to stop hair loss in its tracks? Through Hims.com, you can explore a range of options that work best for you, so you can grow.
Responded code 3, lights and sirens. Arrived on scene, saw Officer Cortez kneeling next to a black male, later identified as Carmelo Anthony, in handcuffs, seated on the sidewalk. Officer Cortez stated Anthony was the alleged suspect. Anthony then made a spontaneous statement and stated, "I'm not alleged, I did it." Officer Cortez conducted a pad search to ensure he did not have weapons, found nothing of evidentiary value. Anthony to my patrol car. He was seated in the rear. Anthony made another spontaneous statement while being walked to the cruiser, asked if what happened could be considered self-defense. I replied by telling Anthony I did not know what happened. It should be noted the in-car camera in my patrol vehicle was activated prior to Anthony being placed in my patrol vehicle. While Cortez assisted Anthony into the car, I noticed he had blood on his left middle finger. I grabbed my department-issued digital camera, took a photograph of his hands, later uploaded the photograph to the crime scene folder. Cortez remained in my patrol vehicle and Anthony, while I provided assistance with scene security. Nothing further from this officer. Officer Will Otis, 10 a.m., dispatched to the Frisco Independent School District. Emergency communication regarding an athlete that was stabbed. Originally unknown assailant was a black male wearing a gray hoodie and blue sweatpants, also had a goatee and short hair. The subject was possibly wearing Centennial High School attire. It was believed he was there for a sporting event. This had all taken place on the north side of the stadium. The victim was under the Memorial High School tent in the bleachers. At around the same time, School Resource Officer Cortez arrived on scene, began assisting the victims, trainers, and others. Cortez advised on radio he had a suspect. Otis was working the 50s sector as the sergeant, full uniform, patrol car, relatively close to the call, got there about a minute afterwards. Began walking up to the location. The suspect was crying hysterically. Please see other officers' narratives for their involvement. Observed the victim being treated by the Frisco Fire Department, personnel and trainers. We all know how that worked out, of course. Austin Metcalf was mortally wounded and died. Surely on the scene, he would have bled out very quickly. Let's see. Sergeant Otis began using a city-issued phone to snap crime scene photos to preserve as much of the scene as possible for evidence due to the weather and the large gathering of people. Other officers set up a crime scene with tape, moving non-essential personnel out of the area. Officers were informed that the knife that was used was tossed and was still believed to be somewhere close. Eventually, one of the witnesses said they remember seeing it on the bleachers. Officer Shouse was able to locate the knife. It was located between rows 9 and 10, partially open. The rain began to come down again heavily. So it was raining, which explains why the tents might have been crowded and space might have been at a premium. And people who set up a tent for their group may not have wanted additional people under the tent who were not part of their group. They set up the tent for themselves. The rain began to come down again heavily, and it was determined that instead of moving the knife, the officers would cover it with a blue tarp. Sergeant Otis assisted in preserving the immediate crime scene as much as possible, while the other personnel tended to the victim and eventually transported him. At around this time, Officer Wetzel had the crime scene log, began logging individuals. One officer released another officer, a total of 33 photos. Downloaded them, put them in the crime scene photo, nothing else to report. Officer Taylor Wetzel, the The same day, assigned to work the city of Frisco, at 10:02 reported to the stabbing at the stadium. Original call note stated an athlete had been stabbed in the chest. The suspect that stabbed the victim goes to Centennial High School. Athletic trainers were on site, were providing care, advised he was not conscious and not breathing. Now, he bled out by then. The notes also indicated the suspect was a black male with a goatee and short hair wearing Centennial gear. I arrived on scene 10:06. When I arrived, I grabbed a roll of crime scene tape, proceeded to the visitors' bleachers where the dispatch advised the victim was. Walking toward the bleachers, I was approached by a witness who identified himself, began telling me what happened. I asked him where the stabbing occurred, advised it happened under the Memorial High School pop-up tent in the visitors' bleachers. I immediately informed Sergeant Otis where the witness stated the stabbing occurred and gave him the crime scene tape to start securing the crime scene. I then had someone move to the walkway under the visitors' bleachers to further speak with me. The following is a summary of my contact. The witness advised he was sitting under the Memorial High School pop-up tent with his team and was near the victim, Austin Metcalf, and the suspect, who was later identified as Carmelo Anthony. Anthony was from Centennial High School and was sitting under the Memorial High School tent. Austin, the victim, had told Anthony, the stabber, that he needed to move out from under the team's tent, and Anthony grabbed his bag, opened it, and reached inside, and proceeded to tell Austin, "Touch me and see what happens." No one really thought Anthony really had any weapons in his bag, and Austin proceeded to touch Anthony, and then Anthony told Austin to punch him and see what happens. This is provocation with intent, folks. These are facts I had not heard before. The stabber is provoking the victim to use force for the purpose of being able to inflict deadly force upon him. That's the most severe form of provocation, provocation with intent, and loses you self-defense as a legal defense. These are bad facts for Carmelo Anthony. Austin proceeded to touch Anthony, and then Anthony told Austin to punch him and see what happens. A short time later, Austin grabbed Anthony to tell him to move, and Anthony pulled out what the witness recalled as a black knife and stabbed Austin once in the chest and then ran away. Austin began grabbing his chest and telling everyone to get help. You notice he's not instantly dead. It's terrible. I mean, he's mortally wounded. It's all over, but he's got a few seconds to think about things while all the blood is pumped at high velocity out of his body. Telling everyone to get help, the witness advised he did not know Anthony's name, but stated another Memorial Track member was friends with Anthony and he could identify Anthony. Witness described Anthony as a black male, skinny, with a possible goatee, short puffy hair, wearing Centennial High School clothing.
Hey everyone, big heads up, Paleo Valley's running a sale on all their meat sticks right now. You can get 30 sticks for $36.
Sorry about
which comes
that.
out to $1.20 per stick. But before you go and stock up, first here's why these are the fastest growing meat sticks on.
This concluded my contact with the witness. I was then instructed to start a crime log. Nothing further to add. Officer Jerry Hancock. On April 2nd, while working as the school resource officer at Independence High School, a weapons call was dispatched that detailed a stabbing at the stadium. After hearing more dispatch call information, I drove to the scene. While en route, I heard Officer Cortez said he had a suspect in custody. On scene, I looked for Cortez, went straight to him to hold security with the suspect. He had cuffed and secure in the police squad. Multiple witnesses were providing statements to officers where the stabbing occurred. Only a short time later, Officer Cortez and myself escorted the suspect, Carmelo Sincere Anthony, to the Frisco Adult Holding Facility. Anthony was transitioned to the jail staff without incident. Next officer, Alvin Fisher. On April 2nd, about 10:05, I was dispatched to the stadium in regards to a stabbing. When I arrived, the crime scene was already marked off, suspect in custody. I began asking people if there were witnesses to anything. I made contact with witness Hunter and then another witness. They were both breathing heavily and crying due to the nature of events. They were with coaches on the field and it was pouring down rain. We made the decision to relocate to a locker room just to the east to get out of the rain. Once in there, things calmed down a little bit. However, they were still hysterical and could not really talk. In there, I learned Hunter was the brother of the victim. So this is Austin Metcalf's twin brother, who held him in his arms as he died. I attempted to ask both of them what happened. I could not really get anything out of Hunter, but the other witness stated he wanted to speak. He stated they were all sitting on the bleachers under a Memorial High School tent when another male, who he did not know, walked over and sat under the tent. Witness then said Austin, the victim, told this male that since he did not go to Memorial, he had to leave the tent. Austin and the male went back and forth, and then Austin stood up and pushed the male to get him out of the tent. Witnesses said during this time of arguing, the male was reaching around his bag he had. It was at this time the male took out a knife and stabbed Austin and then left the scene. This was all the witness remembered when he talked to me. After this, I stood with 3 athlete witnesses until the Criminal Investigation Division arrived and interviewed them. Next officer, Mike Crawford. Around 10 a.m., I was dispatched to the stadium, arrived on scene, observed medical personnel standing next to a subject, later identified as the victim, Austin Metcalf. Medical personnel were actively engaged in life-saving measures, hopelessly. I observed that a crime scene was created around the area, began collecting the names and contact information of bystanders. I met Officer Wetzel, directed him to begin a crime scene log. As he was getting the needed paperwork, I took over his responsibilities of monitoring a witness to the event. Ultimately, the witness was taken to another area out of the rain. From that point forward, I was coordinating with different investigators, took no other action at the scene, nothing further. Next officer, Jacob Schultz. Working as SRO at the Student Opportunity Center, 10 o'clock, dispatched to a stabbing. It should be noted my location was approximately 200 yards from the stadium. On arrival, I tried to get updated location. I could not see Officer Cortez when I arrived. He informed over the radio he had the suspect in custody. I turned my attention to the victim. Multiple Frisco Independent School District trainers were already performing CPR. I could see blood on and around the victim. Blood would have been everywhere. It would have been sprayed like out of a hose. At this time, medics arrived and began life-saving measures. Of course, that was all pointless. I used crime scene tape, began to tape off the area. It began to rain harder. We moved a Memorial High School tent over the medics and victim to attempt to preserve any evidence that we could. The coach approached and informed me that he was with a student who claimed to see the entire altercation. I told the coach to stick with the student. We would need to get him to the police station to give a statement. The student quickly informed me that he knew where the suspect threw the knife and pointed me to its location. I located the knife, could see blood on the knife, quickly used my city-issued phone to take pictures before the rain could wash the blood away. Sergeant Otis located a blue tarp. We decided we should cover the knife without touching it in an attempt to preserve any evidence. It was windy and raining hard. Once we positioned the tarp over the knife, I reached down and grabbed a backpack left in the stands to weigh the tarp down and threw it up where Sergeant Otis was positioning the tarp. It was later discovered that the backpack I threw up on the tarp was the suspect's backpack from which he had presented the knife. It was the only Centennial High School backpack located within all of the Memorial High School backpacks in that area of the stands. After securing the scene with crime tape and attempting to preserve as much evidence as possible, I assisted other officers with locating other possible witnesses. Nothing else much there happened. Next, Officer Kyle Pemberton, 10:04, responded to the stadium in response to a reported stabbing. Let's see if there's anything new here. Not really. Next officer, Justin Newton. I responded to Texas Health Plano to assist with the case, tasked with meeting the ambulance, arriving at the hospital. They arrived at 10:46 with the victim, Austin Metcalf, brought into the trauma bay. At 10:53, Dr. Chow pronounced Austin deceased. Once he was pronounced, staff stopped treatment, disconnected cords and tubes without removing anything from the body itself. While on scene, I took possession of the clothing worn by Austin, maintained possession of the items until crime scene investigator Dillard took them from me. While on scene, Officer Landon requested assistance in lifting the sheets off the body to take photos and then place the sheets back when complete. Stood in the room for security while they took additional photos. At one point, they rolled the body, removed shorts from the victim, which were bagged, stayed in my custody. Family was allowed into the scene to view the body. man. I was informed by staff and officers that they would be allowed to touch the head and feet of Austin, which they did. Medical examiner arrived, took possession of the body, tag number 1016978. Austin Metcalf's final number.
If you paid more than $20 on tax preparation last year, you need to visit freetaxusa.com, where your
Okay, I guess he had his body-worn camera on in covert mode, and then he went to turn it off, and he realized it had never activated in the first place, so it was not recording. Officer Andrew Higgins, working the desk. 1042, let's see, working the desk at Frisco Health, maybe? Is that the address of Frisco Health? 1042, white male walked into the main lobby stating he had witnessed the stabbing and was told to come to the lobby. This is the police station. Told to come to the lobby to complete a witness statement. He gave a voluntary statement, which he worked on until detectives arrived to speak with him. He left with detectives. Officer Thomas Craig, approximately 10 a.m., heard via radio that a student had been stabbed, responded to the scene, made contact with Cortez. He had detained the suspect, and then responded to the victim scene. As I walked up, I noticed Frisco Fire attempting to provide life-saving efforts. Other officers worked the scene to keep the following Memorial High School students' witnesses separated. The 3 witness names there. While with them, I was told to take their cell phones from them and later turn them over to Sergeant Bissonette. They lost their cell phones. I was asked to make contact with all the athletes that had been placed on school buses. Below is a list of the students. So a long list of students. These are all redacted because they're minors. I was also met by the following coaches, and there's a handful of coaches here. Officer Alejandro Aviles responded to a stabbing call, provided scene security, assisted with keeping civilians away. That's it. Officer Joshua Miller, same thing, provided on-site security, assisted in moving people out of the way so the ambulance could leave. That was it. All right, so where in this report is there conduct by Austin Metcalf, the victim, that could reasonably be perceived as an imminent threat of unlawful deadly force harm to Carmelo Anthony? The worst we hear is that Austin Metcalf put his hands on me. He put his hands on me. I told him not to. We have a witness saying he grabbed, that Austin Metcalf grabbed Carmelo Anthony. Is grabbing someone likely to inflict death or serious bodily injury? No. Not in this circumstance. 2 young men of similar size and strength, athletes. Simply grabbing someone is not... Now, might that be an unlawful battery? Sure, I guess you could make that argument. That Anthony Metcalf was committing a simple battery? Maybe not. But it certainly wasn't conduct that was likely to inflict death or serious bodily injury. And what is required for the lethal use of force in self-defense to be lawful under Texas law? Let's pull it up again. The Texas Deadly Force Self-Defense Statute. For the use of deadly force to be lawful self-defense, the defender, here, Carmelo Anthony, had to reasonably believe that the deadly force was immediately necessary to protect against Austin Metcalf's attempted use of unlawful deadly force. Is there any evidence here to support the reasonable perception that Austin Metcalf was threatening unlawful deadly force upon Carmelo Anthony? If anything, there's evidence to suggest that Carmelo Anthony engaged in provocation with intent, deliberately provoking Austin Metcalf to go hands-on for the purpose of having an excuse to use the knife he knew he had in his bag upon Austin Metcalf. See if I can find that quickly again in this big text. Would if I can do a search. Let's see. Here it is. Then Anthony told Carmelo Anthony, the stabber, told Austin to punch him and see what happens. That sounds to me like provocation with intent. That loses you self-defense. Even if you would otherwise have met the conditions for self-defense, which are not here, there is no deadly force threat evidenced by Austin Metcalf. But even if you had met those conditions for lawful self-defense, you lose it anyway if you engage in provocation with intent. Yes, it's just like the mattress guys. Take your swing, take your swing. Take your swing. You're provoking the other person to violence, so you'll have an excuse to use deadly force against them. Who said he made this statement? It was it's an unnamed, it's a redacted witness, one of the student witnesses, speaking to the police contemporaneously at the event. So, when we think about the 5 elements of self-defense, innocence, imminence, proportionality, avoidance, and reasonableness, all of which are captured in the Texas self-defense law, except for avoidance. Texas is a stand-your-ground state. There's no duty to avoid. So it's only innocence, imminence, proportionality, and avoidance, effectively just 4 elements. Carmelo Anthony would have had to have been the innocent victim of imminent, unlawful, deadly force threat at the hands of Austin Metcalf. And there's not a scintilla of deadly force threat being offered here. Now, we might wish that we lived in a world where someone put their hands on you. That alone was sufficient to justify your use of deadly defensive force. John Wayne had something to say to that effect back in the day. I don't put my hands on other men, and they best not put their hands on me. All right. I do want to finish this up by the top of the hour. I have a business call I have to deal with, but let me take a quick look at the Law of Self-Defense member questions, and then I'll check out the Super Chats. It looks like we only have one so far. If you're on YouTube, and there's thousands of you, if you're on YouTube and you'd like a question or comment addressed by me during this live stream, it needs to be in the form of a $5 Super Chat, minimum $5 Super Chat. If nothing else, folks, if you could please subscribe. Our goal is to get to 1 million subscribers. We can only do that with your support, which you have been enormously offering to us, graciously offering us your support. There it goes. Those numbers keep scrolling up. I love to see it. You're so kind. We couldn't do any of this without you. Please hit that subscribe button. Please hit the thumbs up like button. That tells the YouTube algorithm to share our content more broadly. Things look grim indeed for Carmelo Anthony. It looks like there is no justification of self-defense, in which case this killing is simply murder in the first degree, looking at life in prison. Could there be a hot-blooded argument that this was manslaughter? I just don't see it. Adequate cause under Texas law to mitigate murder to voluntary manslaughter means a cause that would commonly produce a degree of anger, rage, resentment, or terror in a person of ordinary temper to lead them to kill. Is someone putting their hands on you, even grabbing you, would that commonly produce a degree of anger, rage, resentment, or terror in a person of ordinary temper? Not someone with anger management problems, a person of ordinary temper that would lead them to kill. It wouldn't surprise me if the defense went for this angle, because manslaughter sucks. It's still good for 20 years in prison, but it's a lot better than life in prison. So I expect they'll certainly be asking for the manslaughter. Well, I guess it won't be a murder instruction. Under the way Texas does it is you're convicted of murder, and then during sentencing, you argue to the judge that it should be mitigated to manslaughter. So I would expect that's what they will be doing. All right, Law of Self-Defense members. Let's see. No video yet. Law of Self-Defense member Andrew says no video yet. Both sides are sure they know if it is or isn't self-defense. It would be shocking, a tent full of people, that no one was rolling video at the time, given especially high school students in 2025. But apparently the cops did seize all the cell phones, so there's video, they'll have it. Does tossing the knife go to consciousness of guilt? Yes, it does. Also, fleeing the scene goes to consciousness of guilt. Carmelo Anthony has raised $200,000 already on Give, Send, Go. Yeah, I mean, listen, everyone's entitled to a legal defense. If people want to give him money, and that's not illegal, it doesn't change the facts and the law of the case. By the way, I see a lot of people making a big deal out of the fact that Carmelo Anthony had the knife at the track meet. For some reason, that doesn't bother me that much. When I was in high school, granted, that was the 80s, but when I was in high school, I carried a knife in school every day in my back pocket, a buck knife. So to me, the knife doesn't bother me. It's the use to which the knife was put. Or if there's evidence that the knife was brought for malicious purposes, that obviously would be relevant. Sakusa says, sounds like a take your swing moment. Yeah, go ahead, punch me and find out what happens.
At Granger, we're for the ones who pay attention to every little detail. The ones who fuss, tinker, and sweat the small...
Yeah, go ahead, punch me and find out what happens. Joe says, have you thought about covering the Doomsday murder trial out of Arizona? It's streaming live. I don't think I'm aware of it. Lori Vallow is representing herself. Well, I know that name. I'll have to look at it again. It's going to be hard for me to stream a trial right now with everything that's happening with Trump. At what point in custody does the suspect get read his Miranda rights? So you're supposed to be read your Miranda rights. The only time it's required to be read to you is when you're about to be interrogated. The police are about to question you as a suspect. Until they're about to do that, they have no obligation to Mirandize you. So if like here, it sounds like these officers got to the scene, made the arrest, transported him to the police department, to the jail, turned them over to the criminal investigation division, the detectives, and none of the officers engaged in any questioning of the suspect. So there was no requirement for Miranda. Now, before the detectives talked to him to question Carmelo Anthony as a suspect, they would have been required to Mirandize him. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure when I was in high school, they must have had a rule against having a knife in school, but I mean, like, teachers knew I had it. I would cut open packages for the teachers with it. Just nobody cared. All right, that's all the members. Let me see. We got a couple super chats, it looks like, maybe. Sherry Lawlessness, $5 super chat says, does having a gun on school property matter? It could matter if the blade of the knife is more than 5.5 inches. Texas has a weird knife law that puts knives with blades in excess of 5.5 inches in a special category. A special category of weapon that could lead to a violation of the special weapon statute that could undermine a claim of self-defense. I would be surprised if the knife was that big. That's a pretty big blade, especially for a folding knife. And you don't need a big blade to cause this kind of injury. I've seen it done with little tiny Spyderco knives, paring knives in the kitchen. It's not that hard to nick the heart, unfortunately. What about school's zero tolerance policy on weapons? Again, unless it falls into that special knife category with a blade of more than 5.5 inches, it's just a knife on school grounds. That may not be permitted. I guess it could even be a criminal violation, but although I would be surprised. But if it is, that's just another criminal charge that could be brought against Carmelo Anthony. I don't know that it would have an impact on his murder trial or his self-defense narrative. Let's see. And a $5 super chat from John355. Thanks for your explanations. I know this is hindsight, but what could Carmelo Anthony have done to avoid this outcome? Well, almost anything, right? Like, not stab them. There was no reason to stab Austin Metcalf. None. And maybe not to get engaged in hostilities anyway. If I was in someone else's tent, school tent, and a member of the school asked me to move, I'd probably just move. I probably wouldn't get into an argument about it. Especially as I suspect we'll hear that it was already raining, that people were under the tent to get out of the rain.
Exactly.
And we never bring enough tents to these kinds of things, so space would be at a premium. Not everybody would fit, usually is what happens in my experience. And here's a kid from an unrelated school taking up space in the tent. That would be better put to use for someone from the school that brought the tent. So I don't find anything unusual about them asking him to leave. I've seen implications that maybe Carmelo Anthony was going from tent. Apparently he was not participating in the track meet. That maybe he was going from tent to tent to steal things. That's theoretically possible, but I would need to see evidence.
Come
of
on,
that.
man.
If
Really?
they find, for example, stolen items in his backpack, that would be evidence of that, obviously. A malicious motive for being there. All right, and that's all the super chats. And that's all I have for you with this update. Please subscribe if you're on a smart device. I think you might not be able to subscribe until you exit the show, so please do it then. I really appreciate it. Love you all. Couldn't do this without all your support. You make all this possible. I'm doing another show this afternoon on the Supreme Court, freezing an order from a crazy lefty San Francisco judge.